Every day, at a trucking yard outside Milan, Tennessee, a fleet manager once walked a row of nearly new tractors with their hoods propped open more often than closed. Between 2011 and 2013, this one company took delivery of 243 of them. Sleek, long-haul International ProStars, straight from the factory, under full warranty. And within months, the same failure kept returning to the exhaust system that was supposed to make these engines legal. Court records would later say the company brought these same trucks in for engine repairs on hundreds of separate occasions. The company was Milan Supply Chain Solutions. The engine at the center of it all was built by one of the most respected names in American diesel, Navistar, under a brand called MaxxForce. New technology is hard. Engineers push too fast. Bad luck happens to good companies. That was the story trucking media told for years. But a Tennessee jury, sitting through weeks of internal company documents and sworn testimony, decided something much darker. This was not an accident. A former Navistar sales executive testified under oath that the company, in his own blunt words, simply hadn't properly tested the engine before selling it. And Navistar wasn't alone in this bet. At the very same moment, one of the largest builders of on-highway diesel engines on Earth, Caterpillar, was quietly making an almost identical wager on the same shortcut for the same reason. One of them would walk away from an entire market. The other would end up in front of a federal securities investigation. Hold on to that word, a bet, because by the end of this video, you'll see the exact same cycle spinning up again right now ahead of a new emissions deadline in 2027. Here's how two giants made the same wager, why one quietly folded and the other ended up in federal court, and why 45,000 truckers ended up sharing a check for it. To understand the wager, you need the fork in the road every diesel engine maker faced heading into 2010. The EPA's new nitrogen oxide limit was the tightest ever proposed for heavy trucks, and there were really only two ways to hit it. Most of the industry, Cummins, Detroit, Volvo, Mack, chose selective catalytic reduction. Inject a fluid called diesel exhaust fluid into the hot exhaust, and a chemical reaction scrubs the pollutant out afterward. It works. It's also an extra tank, an extra fluid, and one more thing a driver has to remember to refill on the road. And manufacturers worried customers would hate that. Caterpillar and Navistar decided they had a better answer. Solve the problem before the exhaust ever left the cylinder, using exhaust gas recirculation alone to lower combustion temperatures enough to choke off the nitrogen oxide at the source. No tank, no fluid, nothing for the driver to manage. Caterpillar had already sunk more than $500 million into its version, branded ACERT, calling it the largest engineering program the company had ever undertaken. Navistar went further with the marketing. Its advanced EGR system, the company told every fleet buyer who'd listen, made it the only heavy-duty engine maker in North America still willing to hit the 2010 standard without urea in the tank. It was pitched as boldness. It was actually two competitors, independently, betting their futures on physics nobody had proven at that scale, and selling the bet as an advantage. That advantage collapsed in a Tennessee courtroom in August 2017. Milan Supply Chain Solutions sued Navistar, and over the course of the trial, the company's own internal record became the best witness against it. A former senior vice president of sales testified under oath that Navistar, in words a jury doesn't forget, essentially hadn't put the engine through real testing before it went to market. Internal emails entered into evidence went further. A former vice president responsible for testing the MaxxForce program had written to company leadership more than once, admitting there had been no meaningful field testing behind technology the company was actively selling as EPA compliant. The jury didn't just find the engines defective, they found Navistar committed fraud and violated Tennessee's consumer protection law, and they awarded Milan $10.8 million in actual damages, more than $8 million of that for the collapsed resale value of the trucks alone, plus $20 million in punitive damages on top, $30.8 million for 243 trucks, because a company sold an engine its own people had reportedly been telling leadership in writing wasn't ready. Navistar continued to contest the verdict on appeal in the years that followed, but the internal documents were already public and they were already circulating through every trucking forum in the country. Here's the detail almost nobody outside the industry remembers. Caterpillar had been here before. In the early 2000s, the EPA fined Caterpillar $128 million over non-compliant engines the company had sold in late 2002 and 2003. A warning shot the industry mostly forgot within a few years. Then, in 2007, Caterpillar's new A-Cert engines, the ones built to dodge the fluid tank, started failing on the road almost as soon as they shipped, with owners filing suit over exhaust system failures, breakdowns, and resale values that collapsed on trucks barely out of the factory. Plaintiffs' attorneys made a point of noting that many of the operations affected were small, family-owned trucking businesses that simply couldn't absorb a fleet-wide pattern of failures the way a national carrier could. By 2011, Caterpillar had settled with truck owners confidentially, and in 2010, the company made a decision that told you everything its own internal numbers were saying. It walked away from the North American on-highway engine market entirely, a business it had helped define for generations, and one its own executives admitted made up barely 8% of total engine production by then. Rather than keep fighting a standard it couldn't hit without the exact technology it had spent $500 million trying to avoid. So how did Navistar keep selling engines that, according to the lawsuits, never actually met the 2010 standard legally for years after the deadline passed? Through a mechanism buried in the EPA's own rulebook, banked emissions credits. Manufacturers that beat pollution targets in earlier years earn credits they can spend later to cover engines that fall just short, a legitimate system built to smooth the industry through hard transitions. Navistar's lawsuits allege the company used exactly this mechanism from 2010 through 2012 to keep certifying MaxxForce engines as compliant, while, according to court filings, its own people already knew the EGR-only design was never going to close the gap to the real standard on its own. It was a loan against a debt the company allegedly already knew it couldn't repay. When the credits finally ran out in 2012, so did the story. Navistar announced it was ending production of its 15-litre MaxxForce engines altogether and abandoning EGR-only technology across its remaining lineup, quietly adopting the same diesel exhaust fluid system it had spent years telling customers they didn't need. The full scale of the damage arrived in federal court in Chicago. A judge approved a $135 million settlement covering an estimated 45,000 plaintiffs, trucking companies and owner-operators who had bought or leased more than 66,000 trucks fitted with the affected 11 and 13-litre MaxxForce engines between 2011 and 2014. Under the terms, any owner could claim a no-questions-asked cash payment of up to $2,500 per truck, a $10,000 rebate toward a new one, or documented out-of-pocket repair costs up to $15,000 per truck. And the story didn't stop with the engines themselves. In 2016, the US Securities and Exchange Commission filed a separate civil fraud lawsuit against Navistar's own former chief executive, Daniel Ustian. Team, they lied. When a company's own engineers are telling leadership in writing that there's been no real field testing, no amount of dealership lot due diligence was ever going to reveal that, pick a side. And if you or someone in your shop ever owned a MaxxForce or an Acert-era Cat, tell us what actually happened to that truck. The real number of trips to the shop is the reason this story needed telling. And remember the bet I asked you to hold on to? Because it isn't finished. A new federal emissions deadline lands in 2027, and the exact same question is back on the table for every engine maker in America. Solve it properly or find the next shortcut. When the industry makes its choice, we'll be back to tell you which one they picked. That's the next video. New video every week.